For 70 years, one woman carried the weight of a crown, not just a crown of gold and jewels, but a crown of duty, sacrifice, and silence. While the world changed around her, wars ended, empires fell, and kingdoms crumbled, she remained, unshaken, unmoved, unbroken. Her name was Elizabeth Alexander Mary Windsor, but the world knew her as simply, Your Majesty. She was never supposed to be queen. She was a young girl who loved horses, laughed with her sister, and dreamed of a quiet life. But destiny does not ask permission. At just 25 years old, a daughter became a monarch, a girl became a symbol, a woman became the most recognized face on earth. For 7 decades, she sat on the throne, through 15 prime ministers, through world wars and cold wars, through scandals that shook the palace walls, through personal heartbreaks. She was never allowed to cry about in public, because queens do not break. They bend, quietly, privately, and then they stand again. This is not just the story of a monarch. This is the story of a woman who gave her entire life, every breath, every birthday, every private moment, to a duty she never chose, but never once abandoned. From the palaces of London to the hearts of billions across the world, this is the life of Queen Elizabeth II, the last true queen of a changing world. Elizabeth was never meant to rule. She was born on April 21, 1926, the first child of Prince Albert, the Duke of York, a royal, yes, but not an heir to the throne. Her uncle, Edward VIII, was king. The crown was his, the future was his, and young Elizabeth, they called her Lilibet, was free to ride horses across the green fields of Windsor, free to laugh with her little sister Margaret, free to simply be a girl. But freedom in a royal family is always borrowed, never owned. In 1936, Elizabeth was just 10 years old when the unthinkable happened. King Edward VIII did something no British monarch had ever done before. He gave up the crown, not for duty, not for country, but for love, for an American divorcee named Wallace Simpson. The palace was in shock, the nation was in disbelief, and a quiet, gentle man named Albert, Elizabeth's father, was suddenly thrust onto the throne as King George VI, which meant his daughter Elizabeth was now first in line. The little girl who loved horses was now the future Queen of England. She did not choose this, she did not ask for this, but she accepted it with a grace far beyond her years. Then came the war. World War II tore through Europe like a wound that would not heal. London was bombed, families were separated, children were evacuated to the countryside. But Elizabeth refused to leave. At just 14 years old, she stood before the children of Britain in a radio broadcast, her voice steady, her words calm, and told them, "We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen, and we know in the end, all will be well." A child, comforting a nation at war. And when she turned 18, she did not sit safely in the palace. She joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the British Army, learning to drive military trucks and repair engines, with grease on her royal hands. But the hardest blow was still coming. In 1952, Elizabeth was just 25 years old, on a royal tour in Kenya with her husband Philip. When the news arrived, her father was dead. King George VI, the quiet, gentle man, who never wanted the crown either, was gone. Elizabeth learned she was queen, not in a palace, not surrounded by ceremony, but in a treehouse, in Africa, far from home. She came down from that tree as a different person. The girl was gone, the queen had arrived, and from that moment forward, Elizabeth Alexander Mary Windsor belonged not to herself, but to an entire nation, to an entire world. Her grief was private, her duty was public, and she never, not once, allowed one to interrupt the other. That is the struggle no crown can prepare you for. 2nd, 1953, the whole world held its breath. For the first time in history, a coronation was broadcast on television. Millions of people who had never owned a TV, borrowed one from their neighbors, crowded into living rooms, and watched. A 27-year-old woman walked into Westminster Abbey, carrying the weight of 1,000 years of British history on her shoulders. She sat in the coronation chair, the same chair monarchs had sat in since 1308. The Archbishop of Canterbury placed St. Edward's crown on her head, a crown so heavy, she had practiced wearing it for weeks, just to hold her neck straight. And in that single moment, Elizabeth II became Queen of the United Kingdom, head of the Commonwealth, and one of the most powerful symbols the modern world had ever seen. But a crown does not prepare you for what comes next. The real turning point was not the coronation, it was everything after it. Britain in the 1950s was an empire in decline. Colonies were demanding independence. The world was changing, and a young queen had to navigate a political storm, while never, by law, by duty, by tradition, being allowed to express a single political opinion. She had to be everything to everyone, while being nothing for herself. Then came the personal storms. Her sister Margaret, the one she had laughed with as a child, the one who knew her before the crown, fell in love with a divorced man, Peter Townsend. The church said no, the government said no, the palace said no, and Elizabeth, the queen, the sister, the woman, was trapped between her duty and her love for her sibling. Margaret sacrificed her happiness. Elizabeth carried that guilt for the rest of her life. Then came Diana, 1997, a car crash in a Paris tunnel. The people's princess, gone, and Britain turned its grief into anger, directed straight at the palace. Where was the queen? Why were there no flags at half-mast? Why was she silent? For days, Elizabeth said nothing, because that is what she had been trained to do, to hold emotion in, to stand firm, to never let the mask slip. But this time, the world did not want a queen. It wanted a grandmother. It wanted a human being. It was the greatest crisis of her reign. And then, she did something no one expected. She broke protocol. She addressed the nation on live television, something she had never done, outside of her annual Christmas message. Her voice, steady as always, but her words, finally human. She spoke of Diana's warmth, her ability to connect with people, and she spoke as a grandmother. When she said, her heart went out to Diana's two young boys. It was 5 days too late for many, but it was real. And in that moment of vulnerability, in that single crack in the royal armor, the world saw something they had never quite seen before. Not the queen, the woman, and somehow, that made them love her more. That was the real turning point. Not the coronation in Westminster Abbey, not the crown placed on her head, but the moment Elizabeth Windsor showed the world that beneath the duty, beneath the protocol, beneath 70 years of unbreakable composure, there was a heart, still beating, still feeling, still human. September 8, 2022, Balmoral Castle, Scotland. The world woke up to news it always knew was coming, but was never truly ready for. Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, was gone. 96 years old, 70 years on the throne, and a silence across the world, so heavy, it had its own weight. Outside Buckingham Palace, people gathered, not because they were told to, not because protocol demanded it, but because they did not know where else to go. Flowers were placed, tears were shed, and grown men and women, people who had never met her, wept like they had lost someone from their own family, because in a way, they had. For most people alive in 2022, Elizabeth had always been there, the one face on every coin, every stamp, every banknote, that never changed. While everything else did, she had outlasted 15 British prime ministers, from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss. She had witnessed the entire arc of the 20th century, and stepped into the 21st, without missing a single beat. But her legacy was never about longevity alone. It was about what she did with every single one of those 70 years. She modernized a monarchy that many believed was finished. She held together a commonwealth of 56 nations, not through force, not through empire, but through dignity, and an unspoken promise that she would always show up, and she always did. 21,000 official engagements. In her lifetime, she met every sitting American president, from Harry Truman to Joe Biden. She visited soldiers in war zones. She sat with the sick, the struggling, the forgotten. Every Christmas day, without fail, she sat before a camera and spoke directly to the people she served, not as a ruler, as a grandmother, as a fellow human being. And through every crisis, her message was always the same: we will endure, we will come through. There is always reason for hope. She was not perfect. There were mistakes, there were silences when words were needed, but she showed up every single day for 70 years in a world that celebrates those who take. She was defined entirely by what she gave, her whole life, every morning, every evening, every breath in between, given completely, quietly, and without complaint, to something larger than herself. When they placed her coffin in Westminster Hall, people queued for 14 hours, just to walk past it for 10 seconds, not to see a queen, to say thank you to a woman who never stopped showing up for them. And as the final bell tolled over London, the world did not just lose a monarch, it lost a standard. God save the Queen. She earned it.